Amen. It is great to get the attention and the focus upon God and off of ourselves. That's one of the biggest blessings about Sunday gathering together with the saints is we get to lift our eyes up, don't we? Lift our eyes up out of our own situation, our own needs and desires and preferences and feelings, and we got to fixate on the unchangeable I am, on God alone, who is worthy of that praise. And I got to confess, that is something that maybe at times has been lacking as we've gone through the book of Judges. As we've gone through Judges, there's been a lot of looking at the sinfulness of sin, the sinfulness of man, and what we can do and how corrupt we can truly become. And Judges has had example after example of just how sinful we can really be. And so I apologize for that, if you've been feeling that a little bit. At the same time, I know that that's God's word for us, and so I hope that it's been challenging and it's been good for your heart. But I am excited this morning to say we get to lift our eyes up. This morning, we get to fixate on our God. What God has before us in Judges 13 is His glory and His grace. Just how majestic and amazing and wonderful He is. And I trust that it will be a blessing for you, especially in light of the context of this book where there is failure after failure, shortcoming after shortcoming, that we can lift up our eyes and say, but there is then God. Still the same, still full of grace, still glorious, despite whatever His creation is doing. And so I hope that ministers to you even this morning as you have attended and you are here, that you are ready to have your eyes fixated on God, and let that be the hope that just absolutely elevates you and brings you out of whatever you are in, or wherever your thoughts have been. Wherever your shortcoming, you know those shortcomings, wherever you've been, to be able to then look up and see God. That's what I'm praying for this morning, that we just simply bask in the glorious grace of our God. So with that, let's jump into where we find ourselves next in the book of Judges. We have finished 5 out of the 6 major judges. We've finished all the minor judges, and we are on to the last and most famous judge, probably, Samson. That is where we go to next, and I'm excited to get into this for the reasons we've already mentioned, to see God on display. So with that, let's begin and get into our text, and let's start with the very first verse in Judges 13, and we see the repetition of sin. You say, that sounds exactly like the opposite of what you just said in your intro. It's one verse, people. You can bear with it. 24 verses after this. There's still more to come, and we will see clearly the glory and the grace of our God. But let's begin with the repetition of sin in Judges 13, verse 1. What do we find? Nothing too surprising for us in this book. And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord gave them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. Yikes. First, we notice Israel's lapse into sin again. That's what it says. And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. It shouldn't surprise us, given our familiarity with this whole Judges cycle. We see how they are given over to idolatry or some form of sin, and they sink themselves into it, forgetting God, forgetting Yahweh, their God. And then what does God do? He gives them into punishment and discipline in the form of oppression, some foreign nation coming in, beating them up, dominating for some time. And then we know where the cycle goes next after that. They finally lift up their hands and their voices, and they cry out, asking for some form of deliverance. But we should be clear to note something is missing this morning. And this is what we're going to see through the rest of the passage and the whole entire Samson saga. Just as with Jephthah, we could not locate the clear act of God raising up Jephthah. We simply just saw people raising up Jephthah. And we thought, that's different. That breaks the cycle. Normally, His Spirit would rush upon someone and raise them up to be the leader. And with Jephthah, it was just simply the people crying out, saying, you're a mighty warrior, we'll take you. Come and fight this battle. And we saw that was a break in the cycle, and Jephthah ended up not being the most positive example. Well, here we also see that there is a break in the cycle. And what is it in this one? We see no indication that Israel even cries out for help. There's no indication that they even ask God for help. And let's just be clear again. They were handed over to the oppression of the Philistines for 40 years. It's a long time. It's a long time to be dominated by the Philistines, and yet we don't see any indication of them crying out. In fact, you could say the opposite. When we get ahead to Judges 15, there's a moment where Samson is doing his thing and doing battle with the Philistines, and then it starts to upset the people of Israel because there's repercussions for everything that Samson does. And so the people of Israel actually get mad at Samson. In Judges 15:11, 3,000 men of Judah go down to Samson and they say, "Do you not know that the Philistines are rulers over us? What then is this that you've done to us?" They're saying, hey, we're used to this. Their own people, Israel, they get to the point where they say, this is just how it is. The Philistines rule over us and we just deal with it. They're not even crying out to God. And in fact, when Samson's doing work in battle against them, they tell him to stop because they like just being used to the fact that the Philistines are over them. So it's a continuation of the downward spiral. That's the spiritual condition of Israel during the time of Judges that you know very well at this point. It also paints the perfect scenario for God to do something, for his grace to be revealed. Notice a couple other details here just in this first verse. We notice the location of Israel's oppression. I've already mentioned that it is in the Philistines, that area, Philistia, they're on the coast. Okay, so we are there down on the coast, and you have a lot of these big cities that you find mentioned later on as well, but Ashkelon and Gaza and Gath and Ashdod, and this whole region known as Philistia. And that directly impacted the tribe of Dan, as we're going to find out later on in the book of Judges, that they can't even settle there because of the presence of the Philistines and how strong they are. We're also not surprised that this is the case, because if we just go back to Judges chapter 10, in Judges 10 verse 7, we read about the idolatry of the people again, and God gave kind of a dual discipline on them. And what did he say in Judges 10:7? The anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he sold them into the hands of the Philistines and into the hands of the Ammonites. So we already saw how he dealt with the Ammonites by letting Jephthah be the one to lead them and defeat the Ammonites. But now we come to this point, we pick up where we left off there. The Philistines coming in is a part of the punishment of Israel's sinning. We also notice the length of the Philistine domination. I mean, we can just read these years and think, okay, yeah, a long time. But seriously, 40 years. 40 years that they're sold into the hands of the Philistines. One commentator does a good job kind of collecting all the data for us, says, the oppression of Israel spanned 8 years before Othniel, 18 years before Ehud, 20 years before Deborah and Barak, 7 years before Gideon, and 18 years before Jephthah. The longest we have is 20. This is doubling how bad we've seen the oppression be for the people of God before God then kindly intervenes. So things are bad for the people of God, and it's especially bad because they're not looking for God's help. You think that's depressing? And it is. But don't worry, that sets the stage for God to do his most incredible work. This is where we see the grace of God come to display. We jump to what is next in our text in verses 2 through 5, and we see the revelation of hope. The revelation of hope. With this sinful and depressing backdrop, we read in verse 2, there was a certain man of Zorah, of the tribe of the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and had no children. And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, behold, you are barren and have not borne children, but you shall conceive and bear a son. Therefore be careful and drink no wine or strong drink, and eat nothing unclean. For behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. No razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb, and he shall begin to save Israel from the hand of the Philistines. First, we see some childless parents that we're introduced to in verse 2. A man of Zorah, of the tribe of the Danites, and his name is Manoah, and his wife is nameless in this text, but she is there as well, and she clearly, as is highlighted, what we need to know, is unable to have children. She's barren. And so this is some of the biographical information we learn, and it's certainly a mark of shame and sadness as we think about this time and these accounts often in biblical history. If God intended for children to be a blessing, then an inability to have children was felt and believed to be a curse. But despite the people's feelings on this topic, what does God do over and over in biblical history? God breaks through that. God breaks through that over and over again to show this is not curse, I will bless. I will bless where it looks like there's even curse. And he does this over and over if you know your Bible. God is purposeful to move toward barren women, that he wants to then advance his divine will and plan of redemption. Barren Sarah became the mother of Isaac, and barren Rebekah became the mother of Jacob and Esau, and barren Rachel became the mother of Joseph and Benjamin, and barren Hannah will become the mother of Samuel, and barren Elizabeth will become the mother of John the Baptist. These are all significant moments and figures in all of God's plan of redemption. He loves to move towards what looks like a shameful situation and redeem it. That's exactly what he likes to do. These are not just instances of God being nice. These are significant moments of his grace being revealed and his plan driving forward. And this story is no exception. Second, in verse 3, we see a child promise very clearly. The angel of the Lord appears to the woman and says to her, "Behold, you are barren and have not borne children, but you shall conceive and bear a son." The angel of the Lord, or the angel of Yahweh, as we might know, to make a distinction between just the angel of the Master Lord, but the angel of Yahweh, the people, the God of Israel, appears to Manoah's wife, and we saw this angel of Yahweh appear back in Judges chapter 2. We also saw this angel of the Lord appear to Gideon in Judges 6. And so this angel has a great message now for Manoah's wife. She shall conceive and bear a son. Good news. Clearly good news. And then with this, there's certain prescriptions that are given in verse 4 and 5. Be careful and drink no wine or strong drink, and eat nothing unclean. For behold, you shall conceive and bear a son, and no razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb. So some instructions here, particularly for the mom at first, right? Make sure you take your prenatals, all that stuff, right? Drink no wine or strong drink, eat nothing unclean. And there are also instructions for the child, though, as well. You might be more familiar with this. No razor shall come upon his head, as we know of Samson, and more specifically, the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb. Let's just ask that question, what's a Nazarite? Well, that's something we also know from the Bible. Numbers 6 tells us and outlines that for us. Numbers 6 gives us the details of what a Nazarite vow is. It's a vow that anyone could take at any point in time for any given period of time. It could be for a month or a year. It could be for 10 years. But it was a vow of separation unto God. And in this vow, there was no wine, there was no cutting of the hair, and there was no interaction with dead bodies or corpses. That's what the Nazarite vow was. That's what it specified. And so we see that's what the angel's telling to Manoah's wife. This is what will be true for your son. Then we see a really hopeful thing at the end of verse 5. A calling proclaimed. And he shall begin to save Israel from the hand of the Philistines. He shall begin to save Israel from the hand of the Philistines. The angel of the Lord reveals this specific calling. But notice the word begin. He will begin to save Israel. This shows clearly that the domination of the Philistines was big and not something that would be overtaken in a lifetime. Super simple. They will continue to cause trouble for Israel after the time of Judges. It's really not until the time of David as a king that we finally see the Philistines being pushed back and conquered. It's going to take a lot of time. But now is the moment. Now is the moment that God promises to start this process of saving Israel and pushing back the Philistines, doing the very thing that they need. But they're not even willing to admit. They're just accepting it. They're bound and shackled. They're prisoners. They're under this domination, and they just say, oh well. What a beautiful time for the grace of God to come in and say, not only are you imprisoned, but you're embracing it. And here I am to set you free. I'm going to change this. I'm going to reverse the tide completely. This is the beauty of the grace of our God. I mean, you just think of moments up until this time and other moments in biblical history, then you see God is such a good God. When his people cry out to him, he often responds and he delivers them. Isn't God so good? Cry out to him and he hears you. You know how good God is? He actually responds and moves into your life and situation even when you don't cry out to him. Talk about the word grace. This is grace. You are not deserving of it. You have nothing you bring to the table. And in situations like this, you don't even know you need it. You're not even asking for it. And what does God say? You're imprisoned. You're a slave. And here I am to start to change that. Here I am to release you from that bondage. Here I am to bring freedom. That's grace. If you did not know Christ, you would be stuck and you'd be going right to the drumbeat of this world, thinking, yep, this is what we do. This is how I live. Sin, and more sin, whatever I want. I guess this is just the way to live. And I try to amass as much money and happiness for myself as I can, and then I die and I just try not to think about it. You are a slave in that way of living. Christ comes in to say, that's not what you were made for. Let me free you from that and give you a life of worship and praise and purpose. A life that is devoted to Christ. This is beautiful. This is beautiful. God reserves awesome moments for himself where grace shines amidst the backdrop of such sin and oppression. We keep reading and we see in verses 6 and 7 the report of the revelation. The report of the revelation. Then
the woman came and told her husband, "A man of God came to me, and his appearance was like the appearance of the angel of God, very awesome. I did not ask him where he was from, and he did not tell me his name. But he said to me, 'Behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. So then drink no wine or strong drink, and eat nothing unclean, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb to the day of his death.'" So now Manoah's wife, known as the woman, came and told her husband what had just happened. And first we see that the messenger is reported. She says in verse 6 very clearly, she calls him the angel of Yahweh. She calls him a man of God. And then she goes on to say his appearance was like the appearance of an angel of God. And then she goes on to say, very awesome. Right? Very awesome. Not in the trivial way that we mean awesome today, but awesome, marvelous, and maybe beyond what I could actually take. She is almost fearfully in awe. She didn't get his name because she forgot to ask, and he never revealed it, she says. And the point is that this was no one to be taken lightly. This messenger was the real deal. And what was the message? She simply reports exactly what she heard. She does a pretty good job reporting it too. She went into repeating the good news, and she relays it well to her husband. She doesn't specifically mention that they couldn't cut the child's hair, but she does say that it's a Nazirite vow, and that's exactly what that is implied. Also, she adds that the child will be a Nazirite to God from the womb, and she says, to the day of his death. To the day of his death, which definitely foreshadows and points ahead that that's exactly what's going to happen with Samson. He will be known as this and devoted unto God in this way all the way up until the time when he will die. It will be very much a part of his own death. Regardless, this nameless woman is rejoicing in this news and passing it on to her husband. She is a recipient of grace. How could she not speak of God's grace? Well, we come to verse 8 and we see something that is probably expected, a request for more revelation, a request for more understanding, more knowledge, more information, more revelation. Verse 8, then Manoah prayed to the Lord and said, "O Lord, please let the man of God whom you sent come again to us and teach us what we are to do with the child who will be born." How does he respond to this news? How does Manoah react? He wants to hear for himself. And I don't think this is necessarily due to doubt. I don't think he's sitting there saying, yeah, right, I got to hear this from the source. No, I think he's excited, but he wants more. He wants more. He seems to be what I would call a typical first-time dad that has no idea how to raise children, right? Oh God, please send someone back to tell us what to do with this thing. What do we do with children? How do we raise them? But he prays for more revelation. He prays that this man of God would come again, even though the man of God was pretty clear to his wife, and even though his wife was clear to him, she didn't fumble the message, he still is asking for more information. And it's probably a mixture of giddy excitement, but also weighty responsibility of what he's just heard. And in his gracious character and in his gracious ways, God listens to Manoah. We come to verses 9 through 14, and we see the revelation reiterated. The revelation reiterated. In verse 9, and God listened to the voice of Manoah, and the angel of God came again to the woman as she sat in the field. But Manoah, her husband, was not with her. So the woman ran quickly and told her husband, "Behold, the man who came to me the other day has appeared to me." And Manoah arose and went after his wife and came to the man and said to him, "Are you the man who spoke to this woman?" And he said, "I am." And Manoah said, "Now when your words come true, what is to be the child's manner of life, and what is his mission?" And the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, "Of all that I said to the woman, let her be careful. She may not eat of anything that comes from the vine, neither let her drink wine or strong drink, or eat anything unclean. And all that I commanded, let her observe." So first in this, we see the reappearance of the messenger in verse 9. Very clearly, the messenger comes back. And it's funny that God listened, but he had the messenger appear to the woman again and not to Manoah directly. The messenger comes back again, and it's again to the wife. Then in verse 10, we see the retrieval of Manoah. She's nice, she's kind. She gets up and runs quickly to go tell her husband. As a kind wife, she runs to Manoah. Then we come to verse 11, and we see the reaffirmation of this messenger. Manoah arose and went after his wife and came to the man and said to him, "Are you the man? Are you the man who spoke to this woman?" And he said, "I am. I am." Manoah runs to the field to see the man, and first he's asking for confirmation of his identity. And the angel of Yahweh is a man of few words. "I am." Fourth, we see the request of Manoah in verse 12. "Now when your words come true, what is to be the child's manner of life, and what is his mission?" Manoah asks his big question, but notice his faith in asking. When your words come true, he doesn't doubt. Is it true? Did you really say this to my wife? He says, when these things happen, like you said, he seems to have faith. He doesn't seem to be a doubter. But then he goes on to ask, what is the child's manner of life and what is his mission? And if you think about it, both of those questions were already technically answered. But he already knows the answers to those questions. The child is to be a Nazarite. That's his manner of life. Don't give him grape juice. Don't give him wine. Don't cut his hair. Right? Don't expose him to dead bodies. That's his manner of life. And well, what's his mission? Well, he's going to start to be the one that pushes back the Philistines. He's going to start to save Israel. That's his mission. So he kind of knows the answer, really, but he wants I want to hear it again, and I want to hear more. And so what do we have from the messenger? Perhaps a letdown to Manoah, but a reiteration. In verse 13, the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, of all that I said to the woman, let her be careful. Just have her do what I said. That's all. Relax, Daddy. I know, you're excited. Baby's coming, I get it. Just have your wife do what I said. Everything will be fine. No new information, just be careful. Again, God is being kind and gracious to these people, especially dumbfounded Manoah. So now not just his wife, he is included, and they are just amazed at such an act that God would do. Well, he feels like he's got to do something. He's got to respond in some way. And so we come to verses 15 and 16, and we see the reward for the revelation. He wants to offer some kind of reward. He wants to do something. He wants to give something. What do we see in verse 15? Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, please let us detain you and prepare a young goat for you. And the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, if you detain me, I will not eat of your food. But if you prepare a burnt offering, then offer to the Lord. For Manoah did not know that he was the angel of the Lord. So first we see a reward that's offered to the messenger. Manoah attempts to offer this meal to the messenger, and this is potentially just a simple thank you that he's offering, or it could be just also in line with typical hospitality of that time. You're a messenger, you're here, let me go cook a goat. Let's have a feast. This is hospitality, this is what I ought to do. You might think all the way back to Abraham when he was visited in Genesis 18 by 3 visitors, and what did he do? Quick, let's get the food out, right? And that was when he was getting the message and getting the understanding of a child that would come for him and Sarah. And so this is hospitality. But what happens in verse 16? It's declined. Declined. The angel of the Lord said to Manoah, if you detain me, I will not eat your food. But if you prepare a burnt offering, then offer to the Lord. Offer to Yahweh. And the angel of the Lord declines this offer, but he goes a step further and he redirects Manoah's desires. He redirects his heart and his efforts towards making his offering unto Yahweh. This is where this is all coming from. This is why this is happening. It's because of the Lord. This is where grace is coming from. Regardless, Manoah is simply trying to respond to the good news with gratitude. As the text says, he doesn't even know who he's talking to. He doesn't recognize. He just thinks that this is maybe, a man of God, some kind of messenger that has wonderful news for us. That's great. Maybe some type of angel, but as our text clearly says, this is the angel of the Lord. The angel of the Lord, something that he is about to see. And that's what we find in verses 17 through 20. In verses 17 through 20, we see the revealing of the messenger. The revealing of the messenger. And Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, what is your name? So that when your words come true, we may honor you. And the angel of the Lord said to him, why do you ask my name, seeing it is wonderful? So Manoah took the young goat with the grain offering and offered it on the rock to the Lord, to the one who works wonders. And Manoah and his wife were watching. And when the flame went up toward heaven from the altar, the angel of the Lord went up in the flame of the altar. Interesting. First, we see the name of the messenger in verses 17 and 18. The name of the messenger. This is how he starts. Well, at least tell me your name. If you're not going to enjoy the meal that I'm going to prepare for you, and sure, it'll be an offering then to the Lord. I can do that. But who are you, though? Can you give me your name? He wants the name. So that when the words come true, like he says, we may honor you. We may honor you. Interesting response from the angel of the Lord. Why do you ask my name, seeing it is wonderful? Why do you ask my name, seeing that it is wonderful? What is interesting about this is there's not really a response here. On the one hand, the angel of the Lord is still not cooperating. No, I'm not going to eat your food. And no, I'm not going to tell you new information. And no, I'm not going to give you my name. But at the same time, we could say he kind of is. Kind of is revealing a little bit more. With this phrase, why do you ask my name, seeing it is wonderful? My name is wonderful. And why do we think that's interesting? Well, if we track that word down and start to see how it plays out in other places in the Old Testament, it's significant. There's one place that you're going to recognize. Listen to Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, a prophecy that you know of. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Wonderful Counselor. Same word that's being used here. And this messenger, this angel of the Lord saying, my name is Wonderful. Much like the child who's going to be born that we know to be the Messiah from Isaiah 9, that will be called Wonderful. We could also see it in another place that I think is quite interesting. In Psalm 139, a beautiful psalm talking about all that God knows and how he is with us. Listen again to Psalm 139, verses 13 through 16. David says, for you formed my inward parts, and you knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. Something beautiful here. These are hints of who this angel really is. Who this angel really is. This angel is wonderful, just like the description of the Messiah as Wonderful Counselor in Isaiah 9:6. And this angel is perhaps the one who works wonders. And thus, he is responsible for this blessing of a child that's being fearfully and wonderfully made now in Manoah's wife. Now this child that's going to come, that's going to be known as Samson, this wonderful work that is directly created and directly connected in Psalm 139 to the works of a child being knit together in the womb of a mother. It's wonderful, and this is the worker of wonders. This is the one who does that. And so I think this angel is actually giving a pretty big hint here. Why do you ask my name? Seeing that my name is wonderful because I'm the one who does this. To Jesus, to the Messiah, to the second person of the Trinity as we know, God the Son. We see this, I think, a little more confirmed in what happens next. Look at the glory of this messenger. The glory of this messenger in verse 19. So Manoah took the young goat with the grain offering, and he offered it on the rock to the Lord, to the one who works wonders. And Manoah and his wife were watching. And when the flame went up toward heaven from the altar, the angel of the Lord went up in the flame of the altar. So Manoah does this thing. He takes the angel's advice and he offers the goat and the grain offering on the rock to the Lord. And verse 19 claims that his offering was to the Lord, to the one who works wonders. Again, right in line with this beautiful message that's been delivered of a child to be born. And more than likely a reference to the wonderful news they just had about their expected son. The text is clear that Manoah and his wife were watching when this happened. This isn't just something that tradition says that this is what happened to the angel. No, they were watching. We got eyewitnesses on this. Eyewitnesses. They were watching in this very moment. What verse 20 records is a wonderfully mysterious and supernatural departure of the angel of the Lord. When the flame of the sacrifice went up toward heaven, the angel of the Lord went up as well in the flame of the altar. And this split-second departure and disappearance of the angel of the Lord, this is the event that certainly would have caught the eyes of Manoah and his wife. This event is what really pushes it over the top for them. Let's look at verses 20 through 23, where we see a response of worship. A response of worship. They're already filled with immense gratitude and weightiness at this promise that's been given to them of this child and taking care of this child and him being a deliverer, a savior of sorts for Israel. And then when the angel of the Lord departs, look at what they do in verse 20. Now Manoah and his wife were watching, and they fell on their faces to the ground. The angel of the Lord appeared no more to Manoah and to his wife. Then Manoah knew that he was the angel of the Lord. And Manoah said to his wife, "We shall surely die, for we have seen God." But his wife said to him, "If the Lord had meant to kill us, he would not have accepted a burnt offering and a grain offering at our hands, or shown us all these things, or now announced to us such things as these." What do we see that's striking and so necessary? A response of worship. A response of worship. This is not some prophet. This is not some man of God. This is not a prophet that gets thrown down on the earth for a moment and then disappears back into heaven. This isn't just a random angelic messenger that is doing God's bidding in his work for him. This is worship to God. This is Yahweh. This is God coming there and making his presence known among them, and then a response to realizing what glory has just been right in front of them. That's what verse 20 clearly says, that Manoah and his wife were watching and they fell on their faces to the ground, immediately struck with the awe of what they'd witnessed. They've seen glory and been in the presence of glory, and they have to fall down. Much like, I think, the consistent response we see of many others in the biblical story. When anyone else gets just a glimpse of the glory of Christ or of Yahweh, of God in Old or New Testament, they get sick, they fall down, they feel like they're going to die. It absolutely becomes a burden on them. And this is just what happened to them. Falling to the ground. Having the privilege of witnessing or tasting just the presence of God's glory. We also see the worship based on factual truth in verse 21. The angel of the Lord appeared no more to Manoah and to his wife. Then Manoah knew that he was the angel of the Lord. He knew. At this moment, the angel departed and he realized who was with them. It was the angel of the Lord. Not simply a man of God, not simply an angel, but the angel of Yahweh. The messenger of Yahweh. Perhaps, I could say, we might have other occurrences of this very type of appearance. Back in Genesis 18, I already mentioned the 3 visitors with Abraham, and perhaps one of them there being the angel of the Lord. In Exodus 3, in the burning bush with Moses, a reference to the angel of the Lord speaking to Moses and telling him to take off his sandals. He's standing on holy ground. And the messenger there in that very story with Moses saying, I am. Tell the Israelites, I am sent you. And then Jesus in John 8:58 saying, I am. Identifying with this very angel of the Lord. In Joshua 5, before the battle of Jericho, appearing to Joshua and showing that he himself was the true commander of the army of the Lord, not Joshua. In Judges 2, we already mentioned when the people were drifting from Yahweh. In Judges 6, with the rise of Gideon. This is probably more than simply a special angel. This appears to be God making a physical appearance to his people at various times in the Old Testament. In fact, since Jesus claims to be the I am, like we says, he claims that he was in that burning bush talking to Moses. These appearances of the angel of the Lord are probably Jesus Christ appearing to people in the Old Testament. Isn't that amazing? This is probably Jesus himself coming down in these most glorious moments to advance God's plan. People call these, you get to your word for the day, Christophanies, an appearance of Christ. An appearance of Christ before his incarnation. Before he actually came to the earth as the baby and the servant of Yahweh, he comes and he makes his appearance as the angel of Yahweh. What do we see in verse 22? We see worship and fear. Manoah says to his wife, we shall surely die. We've seen God. We're done for. Sounds like Isaiah in chapter 6 of Isaiah when he's in the temple and he sees this appearance of God, which we learn later from John 12 is also Jesus. And what does Isaiah say? Woe is me. I am undone. I can't handle this. Too much glory. Surely going to die. Manoah reacts in fearful awe of Christ. But we also see worship and faith in verse 23. What does the wife do? Oh, honey. Oh, honey, it's okay. Let me reason with you a little bit, honey. If the Lord had meant to kill us, he would not have accepted a burnt offering and a grain offering at our hands. He wouldn't have shown us all these things, and he wouldn't have announced such things as these. Why would he promise a child just to appear to us in such glory and squash us? But this is still worship, and this is faith. Manoah's wife reassures Manoah that this must be a part of God's plan. And they've seen glory so that they might walk in faith and do all that they have been instructed. And this is beautiful because what happens, it's not just big promises, it's not just big expectations and big hopes that are here in the text. We get to end our time seeing the fulfillment of it, the rise of Samson. The rise of Samson in verses 24 and 25. Does God come through? Absolutely. And the woman bore a son and called his name Samson. And the young man grew, and the Lord blessed him. And the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him in Mahane Dan between Zorah and Eshtaol. So first we see the Lord's fulfillment of his promise very clearly in the beginning of verse 24. The woman did in fact bear a son, and they called his name Samson. God clearly came through. We'll highlight again, still it seems like perhaps all is not perfect. It's an interesting choice for a name. Samson, little son, or Sonny, right? Like the sun in the sky, son. And you think, okay, that sounds a lot like the Canaanites. That sounds like a lot like what the other nations do. They worship the sun god, and they even have temples for it, and they have all these rituals for worshiping the sun. And you're going to name your child the deliverer of Israel, the one pointing to Yahweh, Sonny? I don't know. Might be a little odd choice for a name there. Is there a pagan leaning in this? It's possible. But is God gracious and merciful? Absolutely. The rest of 24 and 25, we see the Lord's faithfulness to his word. The young man grew and the Lord blessed him. And then the Spirit of the Lord begins to stir in him and come upon him. Samson is going to grow and God's going to bless him and he's going to be used exactly how God said. He will begin to push back the Philistines. He will begin to do that very work that God promised as a deliverer. So we look at a passage like this and we see what look like clueless people, Manoah and his wife, a sinful nation, not even crying out to God, not a prayer going up, even though they're in complete oppression of the Philistines. And how does God respond? Again, this is one of those moments where you could take a step back and say, what are God's options? If he wanted to, he could say, squash the Israelites, start over with someone new. But he doesn't do that. This is the opportune time where he's going to say, look, they don't even want me anymore. They're not even calling out to me anymore. But that's not what God does. And that's not our God. He's a God of grace. And he's glorious in how he has revealed himself. He's a God of grace that he would still interact with his people, that he would still love them, and he would still drive his plan forward, and he would reveal himself in such glory. So that, what's the response? Worship. So that we might worship him. We might recognize who we're dealing with. It's amazing already to know that God could crush us at any moment. And he'd be totally right in doing so because he's a holy God. But there's something about taking that glory and that amazement to another step further. That he could do that, but instead he forgives us. Instead he chooses to be gracious with us. What should that evoke in us? Worship. We should come to that spot even more so, where we worship him. Yes, he could crush us, but he forgives us, and he's gracious. Let's bask in the grace of our God. Not so that we can go out and live however we want, but so that we give him the worship he deserves, because he is truly a glorious and gracious God. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for sending your Son, Jesus Christ. We picture our situation, and we imagine our world and our lives, ones where we think and we want to believe that we are more righteous than those that we read of in the Bible. But we know that's just our pride talking. And we know that we are riddled with tons of sin ourselves and completely corrupted. But you don't let us sink in that and only stew on that, God. You let us look to the glorious incarnation of your Son, Jesus, who came to this world to go to the cross, to take away sin for us when he could have come to this world to bring judgment and destroy us. Thank you so much for such grace. Thank you so much for your glory displayed in your Son. Help us, God, to be a church that is simply overwhelmed with gratitude, constantly looking back to the cross, constantly reminded of Jesus, constantly reminded of how you have treated us when we did not deserve it. Thank you for grace, and thank you for your Son, Jesus Christ. May we live worshipful lives because of it.